Let's take another look at inclined planes, which is leg presses and hack squats, and see what happens. We've been over the math stuff behind this before, but let's look at the actual reality of it when we start moving something. So what we've got here is 100 grams, the weight of this little cart that we're going to use to pull that 100 grams up there, and this guy also weighs something, and a small scale. So this weighs about 60 grams. If I put this guy on here as well, then we have about 160 grams, and you can see that. I don't know if you'll be able to see from this distance, but you can also see the effects of moving this guy around. Now, you can see that this changes really rapidly. I don't have to do much to this, and that's because normally we're just lifting as gravity pushing down, but when I pull this up, the spring wants to go back up. So the upward force is not just me now, it's also me and the spring, which means this changes much more rapidly than if I was to do this with a dumbbell. But anyway, let's get into the incline plane. So we've got 160 grams on here. This angle that we can see in front of me is about 20 degrees, okay? So when I say 20 degrees, I mean this angle underneath here. And the sine of 20 degrees is this distance, and the sine of 20 is about 34%, right? 0.34-ish. So we should expect we're going to need to produce a lot less force to move this guy per unit that it crosses along here versus if we were doing that vertically. The only way we can conserve the work, if we want to bring this object to a set height, but we're going to produce less force, is it has to travel a greater distance. This is a greater distance, as you can see, than this. And so I could either produce more force and get it there possibly a little faster, a shorter distance, or I could use an inclined plane. I could use a leg press, a hack squat, a ramp, and I would be able to use less force and get it to the same point, but only by making it travel further. So we had 160 grams pulling on this scale as it went down there. That is zeroed. So if we get him, now there's going to be some friction on this cart as well. So it's not going to be perfect, but let's see. And sadly, you're not going to be able to see on this particular scale, but if I'm pulling him up, right now, he has about 80 on the spring. And obviously if I let that go, now to hold him still only requires 60 grams of force, or the equivalent in newtons of that. And that's now because friction is helping stop him go down the slope. If friction wasn't there, this would be a little bit higher. And then as I start moving, this guy moves around because the forces aren't static, they're constantly changing. But I can use 80-ish to maybe 90 equivalent grams of force. Right? We could talk in newtons, but we've been talking in terms of the grammage of this thing, so I'll keep it in that same unit. I have to produce much less on here to get this guy to come up and down. And again, if I change that around and put it back to here, that has now gone from that 80 or 90 much closer to about 170. And so yes, the reality is I have to produce less force when I go up an inclined plane than if I lift it vertically, which you kind of know and you knew from life and living. Okay, so now we've got an angle of about 35 degrees, and you can see I've had to use another object now to stop this guy sliding along. But it's more vertical, and so I'm going to need a little bit more force in order to get there, because this now is a greater height relative to where I was taking it before. So whereas previously I was using, it's getting closer to vertical, right? Whereas previously we only had about 80 on the scale. And again, sadly, you're gonna have to take my word for it. Hopefully, maybe I'll be able to turn it around a little bit. Oh, I can, that's cool. Okay, so we've got like 100-ish to 110 on there now. The mark is here, whereas previously it was a little bit higher up. So as expected, we have to produce more force to come up this slope because it's higher. And fundamentally, when you take that to its end game, it's at that point, right? I'm trying not to let this 100 grams fall out the front here, but it would be there. That's as much work as you're going to do when it's completely vertical, at least if we're talking about gravity. And then until we get to this point where there is no work being done against gravity. There might be work being done against friction, but there is no gravitational work being performed at that thing. So whenever we're looking at inclined planes, hack squats, leg presses, whatever you want to bring up, the building site, Inclined planes just allow you to produce less force against an object to get it to move, with the trade-off being that you then have to take it a greater distance to get it to a set height. So the lower the ramp becomes, the less work you have to do, but then the further you have to travel. It's pretty much that simple.